My own daughter stole the one thing that still connected me to my late wife. She sold it off like it was nothing more than worthless junk, just to buy herself designer clothes and show them off to her friends. She thought I would stay quiet, that I was too old to fight back. But she had no idea what she had just unleashed. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. The weight of emptiness pressed against my chest as I walked through our home of 45 years, my fingers instinctively reaching for the gold band that once belonged to Margaret's grandmother. It had become my daily ritual since Margaret passed 2 years ago, touching the ring, closing my eyes, and remembering her smile. The antique ring, with its intricate design and small diamond, wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was our history, our love story, Margaret's legacy that stretched back generations. I kept it in a small velvet box on my nightstand, where I could see it first thing every morning and last thing every night. At 68, I had accepted my new solitary life, finding comfort in these small connections to the woman who had been my everything since we were 23. The house still felt like Margaret, her favorite armchair by the window, where she'd sit with her morning coffee, watching the birds at the feeder she'd insisted on installing, the garden she'd tended with such care, now maintained by my arthritic hands in a poor imitation of her skilled touch, the kitchen, where she'd hummed softly while preparing Sunday dinners for our family and friends. Everything reminded me of her, but nothing held her essence quite like that ring. It had been there when I proposed on a snowy Christmas Eve in 1975, there through the birth of our daughter, there through Margaret's battle with cancer, there until the very end, when the hospital staff had gently removed it from her finger and placed it in my trembling hands. My daughter Jessica, though, seemed to view my widowhood as an inconvenience in her 19-year-old life. Even as a child, she'd been challenging, demanding, self-centered, the kind of girl who threw tantrums until she got exactly what she wanted. Margaret had always been the disciplinarian while I played the role of the soft-hearted father, unable to deny my little girl anything she desired. "She needs boundaries, Robert," Margaret would say with exasperation. "You're not doing her any favors by giving her everything she wants." But I couldn't help myself. Jessica's smile, so like her mother's, was my weakness. Now, Jessica treated our family home like a hotel, coming and going at all hours, leaving messes in her wake, and treating me more like her personal ATM than her grieving father. "Daddy, I need money for this." And, "Daddy, everyone has that," were phrases I heard more often than, "How are you feeling?" or, "Can I help with anything?" Her college apartment, which I paid for, was rarely visited. Her classes, which I funded, were often skipped. Her part-time job at the campus bookstore provided just enough income for coffee and snacks, while I covered everything substantial: tuition, rent, car, insurance, credit cards, phone. Still, she was my daughter, my only child, my last connection to Margaret. So I continued giving, funding her college education, her car payments, her apartment deposit, her credit card bills, hoping that eventually she'd mature, that she'd become the kind-hearted woman Margaret had tried to raise. I never imagined that a single act would shatter any remaining illusions I had about the girl I'd raised. I never imagined that my own daughter would betray me in a way so profound that it would transform me from a grieving, permissive father into someone I never thought I could become. I remember that day with perfect clarity, a Tuesday in October when the maple tree in our front yard had turned a brilliant red. I had a doctor's appointment, nothing serious, just a routine checkup that took longer than expected. The waiting room had been crowded, full of elderly patients like myself, all of us flipping through outdated magazines and avoiding eye contact. When my name was finally called, the nurse had smiled sympathetically, noting my elevated blood pressure. "It's normal for someone who's recently lost a spouse," she assured me as she wrapped the cuff around my arm. "Grief affects us physically, too." The doctor had said much the same thing, prescribing a mild medication and suggesting I join a support group. I had nodded politely, taking the prescription I had no intention of filling. Margaret had always been suspicious of medication, preferring natural remedies, and even now I couldn't bring myself to go against her wishes. The appointment had taken over 2 hours, leaving me tired and eager to return to the comfort of our home. When I returned home, something felt immediately wrong. The house was too quiet, too still, as if holding its breath. The front door had been unlocked, though I distinctly remembered securing it before leaving. A faint scent of Jessica's perfume lingered in the entryway, the floral fragrance that Margaret had given her for Christmas the year before she died. Jessica had a key, of course, but she rarely used it, preferring to text me when she needed something rather than retrieve it herself. I made my way upstairs, calling Jessica's name, wondering if she'd stop by while I was out. My voice echoed in the empty house, unanswered. As I approached my bedroom, my heart began to race. The door stood ajar, and even from the hallway, I could see that something was off. The sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated the disorder within. Drawers pulled out, items displaced, the careful arrangement of my personal space disturbed. Stepping inside, I froze. My dresser drawers had been pulled open, their contents disturbed. The closet door was open, boxes on the floor that had been neatly stacked on the shelf. Margaret's jewelry box sat open on the dresser, her modest collection of necklaces and earrings apparently untouched. But my eyes were drawn immediately to the nightstand, where the small velvet box sat open and empty. I lunged for it, as if by some miracle the ring might still be there, hidden in the folds of the velvet. But there was nothing. The last physical connection I had to Margaret, the ring that had been in her family for generations, the ring I had promised to keep safe and eventually pass down to our grandchildren, was gone. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, the empty box clutched in my trembling hands. Decades of memories washed over me. Margaret's face when I slid that ring onto her finger, her grandmother's proud tears, our whispered promises of forever. The day Jessica was born, Margaret gazing at our daughter while the ring glinted in the hospital lights. Our 30th anniversary, when I had the ring cleaned and Margaret cried at how it sparkled just like on our wedding day. Her final weeks, when the ring hung loose on her finger as cancer ravaged her body. Had someone broken in? I tried to think clearly through the fog of panic and grief. Nothing else seemed to be missing. Not my wallet with emergency cash, not Margaret's pearls in the jewelry box, not the silver frame with our wedding photo. This wasn't a random burglary. This was targeted. Someone had come specifically for this ring, and deep down, I already knew who it was. I just couldn't bear to acknowledge the truth until I heard it from her own lips. 3 hours later, the front door slammed, and Jessica's voice called out, "Daddy, are you home?" I hadn't moved from my spot on the bed, the empty ring box still in my hands. My back ached from sitting hunched over for so long, but the physical discomfort barely registered against the hollow ache in my chest. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the rustle of shopping bags, the unmistakable sound of her humming happily to herself. The tune was familiar, Dancing Queen by ABBA, one of Margaret's favorites that she'd often sing while cooking. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica, humming her mother's song after selling her mother's ring, when she appeared in the doorway, her arms laden with glossy shopping bags emblazoned with designer logos, her expression shifted from surprise to something else, something that made my blood run cold. Not guilt, not shame, just mild annoyance at finding me there, as if I'd interrupted her moment of triumph. Her hair was freshly styled, shining and sleek in a way that suggested a recent salon visit. Her nails gleamed with a new manicure, and she wore a lipstick shade I hadn't seen before, something bright and expensive looking. "What's wrong, Daddy? You look awful," she said, dropping her bags on the floor. The casual way she discarded them, these precious purchases that had cost her nothing but had cost me everything, made my stomach turn. I held up the empty box. "My ring," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret's grandmother's ring. It's gone." I watched her face, hoping against hope that she would look shocked, concerned, ready to help me search for it or call the police. Instead, she shrugged, an actual shrug of her shoulders as she began pulling items from her shopping bags. "Oh, that? I got Pi 900 for it. Look at this Gucci bag. Isn't it gorgeous?" She held up a black leather purse with some gold emblem, her face alight with excitement. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. The room seemed to tilt around me, the floor unsteady beneath my feet. "You took it! You sold Margaret's ring?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow, as if someone else was speaking. She rolled her eyes as if I was being unreasonable. "It was just collecting dust, Daddy. Mom's dead anyway. She doesn't need it, and I really needed these clothes for school." The casual cruelty of her words struck me like a physical blow. Mom's dead anyway. As if Margaret's death had rendered worthless everything connected to her. As if the ring that had symbolized our love for 45 years was just an outdated accessory taking up space. She continued pulling items from her bags, a silk scarf in some trendy pattern, shoes with red soles that I vaguely recognized as an expensive brand, a wallet with some designer's initials embossed on the leather. Each item she displayed was like a knife twisting in my chest. My daughter had stolen the most precious thing I owned, the physical embodiment of my love for her mother, and traded it for fashion accessories, things that would be out of style in a season, forgotten in a year, discarded when the next trend came along. "Jessica," I managed to say, "that ring was priceless. It was your great-grandmother's. It was meant to stay in our family forever." She barely glanced at me, too busy admiring a gold bracelet she'd slipped onto her wrist. "Well, we needed the money more than we needed some old ring. Besides, it wasn't even that pretty. The diamond was tiny." In that moment, looking at her proud smile as she modeled a jacket that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, which had already been fractured by Margaret's death. This was different. This was the severing of something I had always believed unbreakable, the sacred bond between parent and child. That night, after Jessica had gone out with friends to show off her new purchases, I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the empty ring box. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had once been comforting but now felt like the groans of a wounded creature. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that reminded me of Margaret's fingers drumming on the kitchen counter when she was deep in thought. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even cry. A numbness had settled over me, a protective shield against the magnitude of Jessica's betrayal. I kept replaying the moment Margaret had placed her hand in mine at the altar, the way the sunlight had caught on that ring, making it glow like a star. The church had been packed with friends and family, everyone beaming as we exchanged our vows. Margaret had been radiant in her simple white dress, her dark hair crowned with baby's breath, her eyes never leaving mine as the minister spoke about love and commitment. I remembered how she'd told me the story of her grandmother receiving it as a young bride in 1923, how it had survived the Depression, a world war, and all the trials and joys of 3 generations of marriage. The ring had been passed down with a solemn promise to honor the love it represented, to cherish it as a symbol of enduring commitment. "It's blessed," Margaret had whispered on our wedding night, as we lay tangled in hotel sheets, her hand resting on my chest. "Grandma said no marriage with this ring has ever failed." And she had been right. We had our struggles, our arguments, our difficult years, but our love had endured until her last breath. When Jessica was born, Margaret had held our daughter's tiny hand next to her own, the ring glinting between them. "Someday, this will be yours," she'd told our newborn. "When you find someone who loves you the way your daddy loves me." But that promise had assumed Jessica would understand the ring's value, its significance. It had assumed she would honor the legacy it represented. Her final words to me, as I held her hand in the hospital, had been, "Keep my ring close, Robert. I'll always be with you through it." And now it was gone, traded for a pile of overpriced fabric and leather. The magnitude of Jessica's betrayal settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about the monetary value, though I suspected she had been grossly underpaid for such an antique piece. This was about respect, about love, about the sacred memories of a woman who had given Jessica everything, including life itself. My permissive parenting, my inability to set boundaries, my desperate desire to be loved by my daughter had led to this moment. I had created this monster who could so casually discard something priceless for her own shallow desires. I thought of all the times Margaret had warned me, all the occasions when she'd insisted Jessica needed consequences for her actions. "You're not preparing her for the real world, Robert," she'd say. "The real world doesn't give you everything you want just because you want it." I hadn't listened. I'd continued to indulge Jessica, to shield her from disappointment, to make her life as smooth and comfortable as possible. And this was the result: a young woman who could steal her dead mother's wedding ring without a second thought. As dawn broke, filtering through the curtains Margaret had sewn by hand, I made a decision. This would not stand. Jessica needed to understand the consequences of her actions, and for the first time in her life, I would not shield her from them. That ungrateful child had no idea what she'd just started. The next morning, I drove to every pawn shop in town until I found the one where Jessica had sold the ring. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. As I moved from one shop to another, my desperation growing with each unsuccessful visit. The first 3 places I tried were dead ends. The owners sympathetic but unable to help. "No ring like that's come through here, sir," they'd say, shaking their heads at my description. The 4th shop was located in a strip mall on the edge of town, its windows plastered with signs advertising quick cash for gold, jewelry, and electronics. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as I entered, a discordant sound given the heaviness in my heart. The owner, a balding man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked genuinely sorry when I explained the situation. He listened patiently as I described the ring in detail, The platinum band with its delicate Art Deco engravings, the small but flawless diamond, the inscription inside that read, "Forever, always, 1923. "I remember that piece," he said, shaking his head. "Beautiful craftsmanship, probably from the 1920s. Platinum setting with those Art Deco details. Came in yesterday afternoon." My heart leapt with hope. "You have it? I can buy it back?" The pawnbroker's expression fell. "I'm sorry, sir. That's not how it works." He pulled out a ledger and showed me the entry. "I offered your daughter 900, which was actually low. That ring was worth closer to 12,000, but she was in a hurry and didn't want to wait for a proper appraisal. Said she had shopping to do." He paused, studying my face. "If I'd known it was stolen, especially from family." My stomach dropped. $12,000. And Jessica had taken 900, then immediately spent over 3 times that amount on designer clothes and accessories. The sheer wastefulness of it stunned me. Not only had she stolen something irreplaceable, but she'd also practically given it away, squandering its value on fleeting luxuries. "The young lady had ID," the pawnbroker continued, his voice gentle. "Same last name as yours. I assumed she had permission to sell a family item. She signed all the paperwork." He turned the ledger toward me, and there it was, Jessica's signature. The looping, girlish handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and school permission slips. He'd done nothing wrong legally. Jessica was an adult, with identification, selling what appeared to be her own property. The pawnbroker continued, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but the ring was purchased just yesterday afternoon by a collector. I can give you his information, but he paid fair market value. It would cost you significantly more to buy it back." I thanked him and took the collector's details, though I already knew I couldn't afford to repurchase the ring. My retirement savings were modest, and much of it had already gone toward Jessica's education and expenses. The 15,000 or more it would now cost to recover the ring might as well have been $1 million. As I drove home, grief gave way to a cold, clear anger. 45 years of marriage, reduced to funding my daughter's shopping spree. The last piece of Margaret I had, casually discarded by our only child. Something shifted in me that day. The permissive, doting father died in that pawn shop, replaced by a man with a single purpose: to make sure Jessica understood exactly what she had done and what it would cost her. The accountant in me, retired but not forgotten, emerged with unexpected clarity. That evening, I sat at my desk with a notepad and calculator, methodically listing every single financial support I provided to Jessica. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light in the darkening room, illuminating the growing list of figures that represented years of indulgence. The oak desk had been Margaret's father's, solid and dependable, much like the man himself. Margaret had insisted we keep it when her parents downsized, saying it would be where we'd handle our family finances. Now it would serve a different purpose, planning my daughter's financial education. Car payment, $320 per month. Car insurance, $180 per month. Rent subsidy, $800 per month. Phone plan, $110 per month. Credit card payments, variable but averaging $600 monthly. Health insurance, $240 per month. Streaming services, gym membership, grocery allowance, spending money for emergencies that never seemed to be actual emergencies. The list went on, each item a strand in the web of dependency I had woven around Jessica. I had been spending over $200-500 every month, supporting my adult daughter's lifestyle, not including tuition payments and random emergency requests. The total was staggering, even to me who had been signing the checks, over $30,000 annually, aside from her education costs. $30,000 to maintain the lifestyle of a young woman who thought nothing of selling her mother's wedding ring for pocket change? Next, I began photographing every designer item Jessica had brought home. While she was at her part-time campus job, I carefully examined each piece, noting brand names, prices still on tags, and details I could research. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Margaret had been the careful one with money, balancing our checkbook to the penny while I was more relaxed about finances. "We need to save for Jessica's future," she would insist, while I'd argue for indulging our daughter in the present. Now, I was channeling Margaret's meticulous attention to detail, creating a financial record that would become my roadmap for what was to come. I spent hours online, learning about authentication features of luxury goods, return policies, and the market for counterfeit items. I discovered that several of her purchases appeared to be fake, the stitching was wrong, the hardware cheap, the logos slightly off. She'd been scammed, paying boutique prices for counterfeit goods at the small shop she'd visited after pawning my ring. The supposed Gucci bag she'd been so proud of was a poorly made imitation, worth perhaps $50 rather than the thousands she thought she'd paid. The shoes with red soles, which I now recognized as Christian Louboutin knockoffs, had a faint made in China stamp inside that the real designer would never include. The irony might have made me laugh if I wasn't so consumed by my mission. By the end of the day, I had a complete inventory of her ill-gotten gains and a comprehensive understanding of her total financial dependence on me. Jessica thought I was just a grief-stricken old man, too weak to stand up to her. She was about to learn how wrong she was, to learn how wrong she was, to learn how wrong she was. For the next week, I maintained a facade of normalcy. When Jessica asked for her monthly allowance, I transferred it without comment. When she complained about her car making a strange noise, I arranged for a mechanic to look at it. When she mentioned needing new textbooks for the upcoming semester, I nodded and told her to charge them to my account at the campus bookstore. I even complimented her new scarf when she deliberately wore it in front of me, testing my reaction. "That's a lovely color on you," I said mildly, watching her face for any sign of guilt or remorse. There was none, only a flash of relief quickly replaced by her usual sense of entitlement. My calm acceptance clearly confused her. She had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps an attempt to make her return her purchases. Instead, she got a father who appeared to have accepted her theft as just another disappointing but forgivable transgression. We ate dinner together twice that week, stilted affairs where she chatted about her classes and friends, while I nodded at appropriate intervals. I asked about her plans for the weekend, her thoughts on declaring a major, whether she was enjoying her literature course. To anyone observing, we would have appeared to be a normal father and daughter, perhaps a bit distant but fundamentally connected. Only I knew that beneath my placid exterior, a cold determination was building. Only I understood that these shared meals were the last vestiges of a relationship that would soon be irrevocably altered. "Are you feeling okay, Daddy?" she asked one evening, narrowing her eyes suspiciously as she helped herself to seconds of the lasagna I'd made, Margaret's recipe that had always been Jessica's favorite. "You seem different." Her tone suggested concern, but her eyes were calculating. Was I planning something? Had I discovered the full extent of her betrayal? Was I finally going to confront her about the ring? I smiled and told her I was fine, just tired. In truth, I was neither fine nor tired. I was methodically preparing for the financial earthquake I was about to trigger in her life. Every night after she left, I sat at my computer, carefully documenting every expense I covered for, every gift I had given her, every dollar she had extracted from me since Margaret died. I created spreadsheets, organized receipts, compiled a dossier that would have impressed my former accounting colleagues. I visited my lawyer and my bank, making arrangements that would protect my assets while severing Jessica's access to them. I spoke with her university's financial aid office, anonymously inquiring about what would happen if a student's family support was suddenly withdrawn. I even drove back to the pawn shop and asked the owner detailed questions about filing a police report for stolen family heirlooms. All the while, I let Jessica enjoy her new clothes, her carefree lifestyle, her complete ignorance of what was coming. Let her savor those luxuries, I thought. They would be the last she'd enjoy at my expense. The day I implemented my plan was unremarkable. A Wednesday when Jessica had no classes and typically slept until noon before spending the afternoon shopping with friends. October had given way to November, bringing with it a biting wind that stripped the last leaves from the trees. It would have been Margaret's 67th birthday, a fact Jessica had apparently forgotten. I had planned to visit the cemetery, to place white roses on Margaret's grave, and tell her about the grandchildren she would never meet. Instead, I rose early, made a pot of coffee, and systematically began dismantling her financial safety net. The house was quiet. The only sounds the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Margaret had insisted on buying just before her diagnosis, saying it would last us 20 years. It seemed she had been planning for a future that would never come, making provisions for a life together that cancer would cruelly cut short. The thought strengthened my resolve as I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, a stack of documents beside me. First, I called the credit card companies and removed her as an authorized user on all my accounts. The customer service representatives were efficient and unquestioning, tapping my information into their systems and confirming that Jessica's cards would be deactivated immediately. "Would you like to notify the additional cardholder?" one asked. "No," I replied. "I'll handle that myself." Next, I visited my bank and closed our joint checking account, transferring the funds to a new account in my name only. The banker, a young woman who couldn't have been much older than Jessica, looked slightly concerned. "Family disagreement?" she asked sympathetically. I nodded, offering no details, and she processed the transaction without further comment. I canceled the automatic payments for her car loan, insurance, rent subsidy, and phone plan. I contacted her landlord to inform him that I would no longer be supplementing her rent payments. "She'll need to cover the full amount going forward," I explained, "or find alternative accommodation." I removed her from my AAA membership, my Costco account, my Amazon Prime, and every other subscription or service she had enjoyed at my expense. I canceled her meal plan at school, her gym membership, her Spotify premium account. Each call, each email, each signature on a form felt like severing a strand in the web of financial support I had woven around my daughter. By noon, Jessica's financial umbilical cord was completely severed. Then I waited. I made myself a sandwich for lunch, something simple, cheese and tomato on whole wheat bread, The kind of modest meal Margaret and I had often enjoyed in our early years when money was tight. I thought about calling Jim, my brother, to tell him what I had done, but decided against it. This was between Jessica and me. The family would know soon enough. The first call came at 2:17 p.m., while Jessica was attempting to buy lunch. "Daddy, something's wrong with my card. It's been declined." Her voice was high-pitched with panic. "Nothing's wrong," I replied calmly. "I've removed you as an authorized user. The card has been deactivated." There was a long pause. "What? Why would you do that? How am I supposed to pay for things?" "The same way other adults do," I said, "with money you've earned." She laughed, clearly thinking this was some kind of joke. Very funny. "But seriously, I need you to fix this right now. I'm at Nordstrom and they're holding a dress for me." "No, Jessica, I'm not fixing anything. You're financially independent now. Congratulations." What followed was a torrent of disbelief, then anger, then desperate pleading. Jessica couldn't comprehend what was happening. In her 19 years, she had never experienced a true consequence for her actions. The realization that I was serious, that this wasn't a temporary punishment but a fundamental change in our relationship, hit her like a physical blow. Her voice oscillated between rage and fear, accusations and apologies. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "I'm your daughter. You're supposed to take care of me." Then, moments later, "Please, Daddy, please. I'm sorry about whatever I did. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I remained calm throughout, explaining in measured tones that she was an adult now, capable of managing her own finances and making her own way in the world. "But what about my car payment?" she wailed. "It's due next week, and rent, and my phone bill. Those are your responsibilities now," I said. "Perhaps you can sell some of your new clothes to cover the expenses." The call ended with her in tears, promising to come home immediately so we could fix this misunderstanding. I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding, and soon she would know it too. Less than an hour later, Jessica rushed home, bursting through the front door in a state of near hysteria. Her face was blotchy from crying, her carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks. Her hair, which she spent an hour styling each morning, was disheveled from running her hands through it in frustration. "What is going on?" she demanded, throwing her purse on the coffee table. "All my cards are declined, and the landlord just called saying the rent is due in full." "That's $1,600, Daddy. I don't have that kind of money." I looked at her calmly from my armchair, where I sat with a cup of tea and the newspaper. "That sounds like a problem you'll need to solve," I said. She gaped at me, unable to process my response. This wasn't how our confrontations typically went. Usually, she would cry or yell, I would cave, and she would get what she wanted. The script had changed, and she didn't know her lines. "But why are you doing this to me?" she cried, genuine tears now streaming down her face. "Is this because of Mom's stupid ring?" I said I was sorry. I set down my cup with deliberate slowness. "No, Jessica, you never said you were sorry. You showed me your purchases. There's a difference." She stared at me, momentarily silenced by the truth of my statement. Then she rallied, falling back on a tactic that had worked countless times before. She fell to her knees beside my chair, a posture of supplication I'd seen countless times when she wanted something. Her hands clutched at mine, her eyes wide and pleading. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I didn't think it was that big a deal. Please, please don't do this to me." For a moment, my resolve wavered. She was still my little girl. The baby Margaret and I had brought home from the hospital, the toddler who had held my fingers as she learned to walk, the child who had climbed into our bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort in the safety of her parents' embrace. The memories threatened to overwhelm me, to weaken my determination. But then I remembered the casual shrug, the dismissive, "Mom's dead anyway," and my heart hardened again. I gently but firmly removed my hands from hers. "Actions have consequences," I said quietly. "You stole from me, Jessica. You took the most precious thing I owned and sold it for pocket change. Now you get to experience what real independence feels like." The next phase of my plan unfolded even more effectively than I had anticipated. My research into counterfeit goods proved fruitful when I anonymously reported Jessica's fake designer items to the brand's copyright enforcement divisions. I created a new email account, attached photos of the counterfeit items with close-ups of the telltale signs of their inauthenticity, and included details about where they had been purchased. The luxury brands took counterfeiting seriously. It undermined their exclusivity and cost them billions in lost revenue annually. Their legal departments were swift and merciless in pursuing even small-time offenders. Within days, she received cease and desist letters from 2 luxury brands, threatening legal action if she continued to possess or display counterfeit versions of their products. The amazing Gucci bag she had been so proud of turned out to be a cheap knockoff, legally worthless, and now potentially a liability. The letters arrived at her apartment in official-looking envelopes with law firm return addresses. I wasn't there to witness her reaction, but I imagined her confusion turning to panic as she read the formal legal language, the threats of fines and court proceedings. Later, she would tell me through angry tears that she had been terrified, convinced she was about to be arrested for unwittingly buying fake merchandise. When she tried to return the items to the boutique where she'd purchased them, she was informed that all sales were final, especially for the obviously counterfeit goods. The shop owner, a middle-aged woman with heavy makeup and an accent Jessica couldn't quite place, had laughed in her face when she demanded a refund. "You knew what you were buying," the shop owner told her bluntly. "No legitimate dealer sells a 2-0 bag for $400. Now get out before I call the police." Her attempts to sell the items online were equally futile. Savvy buyers recognized the fakes immediately and mocked her listings. "Is this a joke?" One potential buyer messaged, "That's the worst Gucci knockoff I've ever seen." Another wrote, "Do yourself a favor and burn that thing before Gucci sues you." The authentic pieces she had purchased fared little better in the resale market, fetching barely 30% of what she had paid. Designer fashion, it turned out, depreciated faster than a new car driven off the lot. Jessica's designer shopping spree, funded by my precious ring, had resulted in a collection of worthless counterfeits and rapidly depreciating genuine items that she couldn't return, couldn't legally sell, and couldn't afford to replace. Meanwhile, I had become surprisingly adept at social media for a man of my generation. Creating anonymous accounts, I shared Jessica's story in local community groups. Local college student sells widowed father's wedding ring for fake designer clothes. I was careful not to identify her by name, but included enough details that her friends and acquaintances would recognize her. The post went viral within our community, shared hundreds of times, each share accompanied by outraged comments condemning the selfish, materialistic daughter who would steal from her grieving father. Jessica's phone began blowing up with messages from friends who had connected the dots. Former classmates, casual acquaintances, even her boyfriend of 3 months, all wanting to know if she was that awful girl who robbed her grieving father. The social fallout was swift and devastating. Jessica's carefully cultivated image as a stylish, popular college student crumbled overnight. Friends stopped inviting her to parties. Her sorority sisters began avoiding her. Her boyfriend broke up with her via text, unwilling to be associated with someone who would steal a family heirloom from her widowed father. Each day brought new humiliations as the story spread through campus. "Is it true?" people would ask, not even bothering to lower their voices as she passed. "Did you really sell your dead mom's ring for fake designer stuff?" Jessica's attempts to defend herself only made things worse. "It wasn't like that," she'd insist. "My dad is exaggerating. The ring wasn't that special." But no one believed her. In a culture where authenticity was prized and toxic behavior condemned, Jessica had become the perfect villain. Materialistic, disrespectful, willing to hurt her own father for a shopping spree. The professional consequences came next. I had always maintained good relationships with Jessica's university administrators, having made several donations to the alumni fund over the years. Though I had graduated from a different institution, Margaret had been an alumna of Jessica's university, and I had contributed in her memory. The development office knew me by name, sending personal thank you notes for even modest donations. Now, those relationships proved useful in ways I hadn't anticipated. A discreet conversation with the dean of students raised concerns about Jessica's moral character and financial responsibility. I didn't have to exaggerate or embellish. The facts spoke for themselves. I showed evidence of her theft, her purchase of counterfeit goods, and her complete financial dependence on me. I explained that I was not trying to get her expelled, merely ensuring that the university was aware of the situation as it developed. The dean, a dignified woman in her 60s, with a reputation for fairness tempered with strictness, listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. "Mr. Wilson," she said when I had finished, "while the university cannot become involved in family disputes, we do take the character of our students seriously, particularly those representing the institution in official capacities." She assured me the matter would be handled with appropriate discretion. The university took these concerns seriously. Jessica was called into a meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee, where her scholarship was placed under review. Though she had not technically violated any academic policies, the committee explained that character-based scholarships required recipients to uphold the values of the university both on and off campus. Her position as a student ambassador, a prestigious role that looked good on resumes and provided a small stipend, was suspended pending investigation. Her work-study job at the campus bookstore, her sole source of independent income, reduced her hours due to budget constraints that somehow didn't affect other student employees. Suddenly, the future Jessica had taken for granted, graduation, graduate school, a career in marketing, seemed far less certain. She came home in tears after the meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee, demanding to know if I had spoken to the university. "Did you do this to me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Did you tell them about the ring?" I met her gaze steadily. "I told them the truth, Jessica. Something you might consider trying." She collapsed onto the couch, her anger giving way to despair. "They're going to take away my scholarship. How am I supposed to finish school?" "The same way many students do," I replied. "Work more hours, take out loans, apply for grants." "But that's not fair," she protested. "I've always had good grades. I've never cheated or plagiarized." "Life isn't fair," I said, echoing words Margaret had often used when Jessica complained about minor injustices. "Actions have consequences beyond what you immediately see. When you betray someone's trust, it affects how others perceive your character. She buried her face in her hands, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy. But it wasn't enough to deter me from the course I had set. Seriously, Jessica was called into a meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee, where her scholarship was placed under review. Her position as a student ambassador, a prestigious role that looked good on resumes, was suspended pending investigation. Her work-study job at the campus bookstore, her sole source of independent income, reduced her hours due to budget constraints. Suddenly, the future Jessica had taken for granted: graduation, graduate school, a career in marketing, seemed far less certain. The legal pressure was the final piece of my strategy. After consulting with my lawyer, I filed a police report for theft of property valued over $50,000. I presented all the evidence: the empty ring box, the pawnbroker's statement confirming Jessica had sold the ring, receipts for her purchases, and a detailed timeline of events. The detective assigned to the case was a woman in her 50s who listened sympathetically as I explained the ring's sentimental value and Jessica's callous response. "Mr. Wilson," she said after taking my statement, "we take theft of family heirlooms very seriously, especially in circumstances like these. Your daughter may be facing felony charges." She explained that the value of the ring, combined with the fact that Jessica was a family member who had access to our home, made this a particularly serious case. Family members who exploit the trust of elderly relatives face enhanced penalties in our jurisdiction, she added. The potential consequences were severe: a felony conviction, probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent criminal record that would follow Jessica for the rest of her life. When Jessica was served with the police complaint, her bravado finally collapsed completely. She called me, sobbing hysterically. "Daddy, please, you can't do this to me. A criminal record will ruin my life." For the first time since this began, her fear seemed genuine, her remorse possibly real. But it was too late. The machinery of justice, once set in motion, could not easily be stopped. And part of me, the part that still ached for Margaret's ring, didn't want it stopped. Let her face real consequences for once in her privileged life. The community response exceeded even my expectations. Our local newspaper picked up the story, running a feature on elder abuse in families that thinly disguised our identities while highlighting the betrayal. Members of our church, neighbors, family, friends, all rallied around me with an outpouring of support. Casseroles appeared on my doorstep. Invitations to dinner flooded my email. People stopped me in the grocery store to express their sympathy and outrage. "I can't believe Jessica would do something so heartless," they'd say, shaking their heads. "After everything you and Margaret did for her." The consensus was clear: Jessica had committed an unforgivable sin against a grieving widower. My late wife's friends were particularly vocal in their condemnation. Margaret would be heartbroken. Her best friend, Susan, told me over coffee. She loved that ring. She wanted Jessica to have it someday when she was mature enough to appreciate its significance. I nodded, letting her believe that had been Margaret's wish, though in truth my wife had specified the ring should stay with me until I joined her. The community's judgment made it impossible for Jessica to show her face in our town without encountering whispers, pointed fingers, and open condemnation. The daughter who had once moved through the world with entitled confidence now kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and flinched at the sound of her own name. The transformation was remarkable, and I had to admit, somewhat satisfying to witness. The girl who had casually discarded my most precious possession was learning what it felt like to lose something equally valuable: her reputation. Jessica's desperate attempts to recover financially were pitiful to watch. She tried returning her purchases, only to discover that most were final sale, and the counterfeit items couldn't be returned at all. Of the 30 she had spent, she managed to recoup barely 400. She begged friends and relatives for loans, but word of her theft had spread, and no one was willing to enable her. "You made your bed," her cousin told her bluntly. "Now lie in it." With her credit cards canceled, her allowance cut off, and her savings non-existent, Jessica faced a financial crisis unlike anything in her sheltered life. Her rent was due, her car payment was late, her phone service had been suspended, and her cupboards were bare. She tried selling her clothes, her laptop, even her phone, but the resale value was a fraction of what she needed. In desperation, she applied for every job she could find: waitressing, retail, dog walking, house cleaning, but her reputation preceded her. Our town was small, and the story of the girl who stole her widowed father's wedding ring had reached every corner of it. Employers who might otherwise have hired a college student for minimum wage were reluctant to trust someone who would steal from her own family. "We're looking for someone with strong ethical character," they would say, not quite meeting her eyes. "We'll keep your application on file." Jessica, who had never worked more than a few hours a week at carefully selected, aesthetically pleasing jobs, found herself unemployable at the moment she most desperately needed income. An intervention was, perhaps, inevitable. My brother Jim and his wife Sarah, who had always been close to Jessica, arranged a family meeting at their home. They invited extended family members, including Margaret's sister Eleanor, who had flown in specifically for the occasion. Jessica arrived, looking pale and thin, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a faded sweatshirt. I came separately, unsure what to expect, but determined to maintain my position. The family members took turns addressing Jessica, their tones ranging from disappointment to outrage. "What were you thinking?" Jim demanded. "Your father gave you everything, and this is how you repay him?" Sarah was gentler but no less firm. "Jessica, honey, that ring was priceless. It was Margaret's connection to her grandmother and Robert's connection to Margaret. How could you sell it for shopping money?" Eleanor was the most devastating. "That ring was my grandmother's," she said quietly. "It should have stayed in the family for generations. Instead, it's gone forever, sold to a stranger for pennies on the dollar." Jessica sat silently through it all, tears streaming down her face. When they turned to me, expecting me to offer some path to reconciliation, I simply shook my head. "She needs to face real consequences for once," I said. "I've enabled her behavior for too long." Jim nodded in agreement. "Robert's right. Jessica needs to understand what she's done." For perhaps the first time in her life, Jessica found herself without a single defender in the room. The family that had always indulged her, excused her, treated her as the precious only child of Robert and Margaret Wilson, now stood united in condemnation of her actions. And finally, I saw something in her eyes that I had been waiting for: understanding. Not just of the trouble she was in, but of the true magnitude of what she had stolen from me. In the following weeks, Jessica began what I can only describe as a desperate campaign for redemption. She sold everything she owned of value: her laptop, her television, her jewelry, even her car. She moved out of her apartment and into a shared room in a house with 5 other students, cutting her rent by 2/3. She took the only job she could find, working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station for minimum wage. She wrote me long, tearful letters of apology, delivered them by hand, and left without expecting to see me. "I know words can't undo what I've done," she wrote in one. "I know I can never replace Mom's ring or repair the trust I've broken, but I want you to know that I understand now what I took from you, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me remembered the little girl who had once drawn me pictures signed, "I love you, Daddy, forever and ever." But another part, the part that still ached for Margaret's ring, remained cold. "Apologies don't resurrect the dead or restore stolen memories," I wrote back in my only response. I returned her subsequent letters unopened. The money she scraped together, a few $100s here, 1,000 there, I accepted without acknowledgement, depositing it into an account designated for the eventual replacement of the ring, though we both knew it would take years to accumulate enough for a comparable piece. Her gestures seemed hollow, too little, too late. The damage was done, the ring was gone, and with it, something vital between us had been severed, perhaps irreparably. The legal case reached its conclusion 4 months after I filed the police report. Jessica, on the advice of a public defender, pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of theft under 5-0. The plea bargain allowed her to avoid a felony conviction, but still carried significant consequences. 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and restitution of 12-0 plus court costs. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, made her displeasure clear during sentencing. "Ms. Wilson," she said, looking down at Jessica from the bench, "the court deals with many cases of theft, but few as troubling as yours. You didn't steal from a stranger or a store. You stole from the man who raised you, who supported you, who was grieving the loss of his wife, your mother. You took an irreplaceable family heirloom and sold it for a fraction of its worth to buy luxury items for yourself." She leaned forward. "The financial penalty I'm imposing pales in comparison to the emotional damage you've caused. Some betrayals cut deeper than any crime this court typically addresses. I hope you understand that while you may satisfy the legal requirements of your sentence, rebuilding trust with your father will be a much longer and more difficult process." Jessica stood with her head bowed, accepting the judgment without protest. The restitution order established a payment plan that would take her nearly 5 years to complete on her current income. As we left the courthouse separately, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness. I had won. Jessica would pay, both financially and socially, for what she had done. But the victory felt hollow. The ring was still gone. Margaret was still gone. And now, in many ways, my daughter was gone too. A year passed. I received monthly restitution payments from Jessica, each one accompanied by a note I never read. I heard through family that she had maintained her night job at the gas station while continuing her studies, though she had been forced to reduce to part-time status to accommodate her work schedule and community service requirements. She had joined a grief support group at the university, apparently trying to understand the depth of loss I had experienced when Margaret died. She had stopped wearing any designer labels, dressed simply, and lived frugally. By all accounts, she was a changed person. Humbled, hard-working, genuinely remorseful. But I kept my distance. The wall between us remained solid and high, until one day in October, exactly a year after she had sold the ring, when Jessica appeared on my doorstep with a small package. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just look at this. Then I'll go." I almost closed the door, but something in her expression, a mixture of hope and resignation, stopped me. I took the package and nodded curtly. Inside, I found a framed photograph I had never seen before. It showed Margaret on our wedding day, her hand extended toward the camera to display her grandmother's ring. The sun caught the diamond just right, creating a starburst effect. Margaret's smile was radiant, her eyes fixed on the photographer, on me, holding the camera. With the photo was a note. "I found this in Mom's old albums. I can never give back what I stole, but I can honor her memory now. I understand what the ring meant. I understand what I took from you. I am so deeply sorry, Daddy." I stood looking at the photograph for a long time, tears blurring my vision. Margaret seemed so alive in that moment, so present. I could almost hear her voice. "Keep my ring close, Robert. I'll always be with you through it." I placed the frame on my mantel, next to our wedding portrait. Then I sat down and cried for everything that had been lost. Margaret, the ring, and the relationship with my daughter that would never be the same again. Today, Jessica and I maintain a cautious, distant relationship. She continues to make her restitution payments and has gradually rebuilt her life on a foundation of hard work rather than entitlement. I have accepted the photo as the closest thing to closure I will ever receive. The ring itself remains lost to us, now in the collection of a stranger who knows nothing of its history or significance. Sometimes I look at that photo and wonder what Margaret would think of everything that happened. Would she understand my need for justice, or would she urge forgiveness? Would she be proud of the person Jessica is becoming, or heartbroken by the pain we've caused each other? I don't have answers to these questions. I only know that justice was served, but some wounds never truly heal. The sacred bond between father and daughter, once shattered by betrayal, has been partially mended but bears permanent scars. And while money can be repaid and apologies can be offered, some losses, like Margaret's grandmother's ring and the trust it represented, remain irreplaceable. Perhaps that is the final lesson for both Jessica and me, that some actions cannot be undone, and we must live with their consequences for the rest of our lives. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.